Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City of Casey Council meeting of the 21st of November 2023. My name is Nolene Duff and I'm the Chair of the panel of administrators. It's a pleasure to welcome you here to the Council meeting this afternoon. I'd like to start with introductions and introduce my panel colleagues. Firstly, Mr Cameron Boardman.
Good afternoon, Chair.
And Mr Miguel Belmar.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Our Chief Executive Officer, Mr Glenn Patterson. We have with us a number of senior officers, including James Collins, Director City Planning and Infrastructure, Jen Bednar, Director Customer and Corporate Services, Steve Coldham, Director Community Life. We have Matthew Crane assisting us in AV and Nicole Road, our Governance Support Officer. And we have a number of other senior officers this afternoon and I welcome them also. I'd like to open the meeting with the Statement of Acknowledgement. The City of Casey proudly acknowledges the traditional owners, Casey's Aboriginal communities and their rich culture, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as Australia's first peoples and as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work and live. Item 1.2 is the diversity statement. The City of Casey is home to remarkable diversity with many cultures, languages, faiths and communities of worship, ages, LGBTQI+ identities and landscapes, together forming our rich and dynamic community story. From our first Australians to our most recent arrivals and every wave between, City of Casey welcomes and represents all community members and their respective ambitions to live healthy, rewarding and happy lives. We recognise this diversity as our strength and we aim to share, nurture and celebrate it. I go to item 2, which is the confirmation of minutes to be confirmed, in particular for the council meeting held on the 17th of October 2023. Do I have a mover and seconder to confirm the minutes?
Yes, I'll move those.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder? You weren't here. I'll second that, and I put the vote all in favour, carried. Item 3 is declaration of interests. I've considered my obligations under section 130 of the Local Government Act and have no conflict of interest relevant to the agenda papers this afternoon. I invite my council colleagues and council officers to nominate any conflicts.
Nothing to declare, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman.
Nothing to declare.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Now move to item 4, which is public question time. There are 6 public questions submitted through Council's website for this afternoon's Council meeting. And the first question is from Paul Greenman. The subject matter is public servants, and the question is, where do I find a list of all the public servants that work in the Casey Council building, Bunjil Place? Our Manager Communication and Corporate Governance has provided the following response. Council has obligations under Schedule 1 of the Privacy and Data Protection Act 2014 to responsibly handle personal information relating to its employees. As such, a list of staff that work within a council building will not be published. A list of senior officers is available on the City of Casey website and has always been available on the City of Casey website. Question 2 is also from Paul Greenman. The subject is documentation. Question 2 is, what styles, manual and edition do you follow for all of the government documents you send out? As I think there is a big problem with the current documents sent out. Again, our Manager Communication and Corporate Governance has provided the following answer. City of Casey has a set of corporate brand guidelines and a writing style guide that is applied to all documents created within the organisation. Question 3 is from Rex Flannery, and the subject is Amberley Park rubbish. Could I ask the gallery if they do want to have a conversation? There's plenty of space outside. Thank you. Question 3 is from, I will repeat, Rex Flannery with regard to Amberley Park rubbish. The question is, 4 weeks ago, I spoke with Casey council officers behind IGA Amberley Park and discussed the rubbish being dumped on a regular basis. I suggested cameras to be installed to catch these culprits, and I was informed, due to a school next door, it was a privacy issue due to children walking past. Since that chat, more rubbish has piled up as people love the idea they will never get caught. What is council's plan to rectify this daily eyesore? Our Manager Waste and Sustainability has provided the following response. Council does acknowledge that there is ongoing illegal dumping occurring at this site and has undertaken litter enforcement investigations and removed waste from the area on several occasions. Officers have now completed a comprehensive crime prevention through environmental design audit at the locality to better understand reasons for people choosing to dump in this particular area and how we can change the environment to reduce antisocial behaviour. The affected area is managed by 3 separate land managers with poorly defined borders. We are working with AusNet and the owner of Amberley Park Shopping Centre around improvements for the site. Question 4 is from Tanisha Finlay, and the subject is Casey tree canopy cover. Referring to the answer to my question at the last council meeting with tree canopy declining in Casey, why isn't there any plan to review the Casey planning scheme at this point in time to increase developer requirements to plant trees? Neighbouring municipalities like Greater Dandenong enhanced their requirements 5 years ago. Doesn't Casey Council realise we are in a climate crisis? Our Manager Planning and Building has outlined the following response. The Casey planning scheme already includes local provisions that relate to various land that encourages the retention of tree canopy cover, such as the significant landscape overlay, environmental significance overlay, and vegetation protection overlay, among others. In the growth areas, precinct structure plans require a significant landscape treatment, including semi-mature canopy tree planting in roads, new local parks and extensive waterways through the new suburbs. Any plans to review local provisions in the Casey planning scheme relating to tree canopy cover are subject to the adoption of the draft Greening Casey strategy. Question 5 is also from Tanisha Finlay on the topic of Casey tree canopy cover. And the question is, separately but in particular, why isn't the current Casey planning scheme amendment C284 being used for the purpose of introducing new developer requirements to plant trees? And in response, the proposed amendment C284 that is currently on exhibition is a rewrite of the current local provisions of the Casey planning scheme and includes previously adopted council work. Any plans to review local provisions in the Casey planning scheme relating to tree canopy are subject to the adoption of the draft Greening Casey strategy. Question 6 is from Mick Whelan, and the subject matter is accountability of administrators, CEO and council officers. The CEO confirmed in writing that 17A Harewood Street, created by realignment, should have utilised the subdivision process and been referred to authorities and neighbours for comment on objection. Under public transparency guidelines, why aren't the administrators and CEO prepared to meet with us to address a satisfactory resolution to their mistake? And the response is that a meeting has actually taken place and the matter is being managed by council officers, and that's been communicated quite clearly to Mr Whelan and others. That's the conclusion of the questions this afternoon. And I now move on to item 5, officer reports, and there are 8 officer reports for consideration at this afternoon's meeting. And I'll start with item 5.1, which is the quarterly community report, July to September 2023. And we have a recommendation. I'm looking for a mover and a seconder.
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder?
Seconded.
Thanks, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight I'm happy to move the adoption of our quarterly community report for the period July to September of 2023. I note that, as with other quarterly reports, this report provides an update on council plan performance, community engagement, administrator engagement and capital works performance. And the report throughout has highlights of each of those subtopics. I note in particular that in the period that I'm addressing, under Strategic Objective 6, which is to ensure good governance and transparent decision making, I note that the matters that are addressed as having occurred during the period were the ongoing delivering of the Community Leadership Program, the ongoing preparation towards the return of elected councillors, which I will refer to later today, and also noting that it was during this period that the Operation Sandon report was handed down. And that is a matter that we've addressed at previous meetings and noted. I also note that with respect to our ongoing capital works, the report highlights both the work that is occurring and those capital works that have been delivered, and these include the Clyde Recreation Reserve at Elliston Estate, the Max Pawsey Reserve Stormwater Harvesting at Warren, which is an ongoing project which is occurring here in our precinct. Noting also the upgrade to Piersdale Recreational Reserve, to the football and cricket pavilion in Piersdale that is ongoing, and the Robert Booth Tennis Court and lighting renewal at Hampton Park, noted as in progress, but noting also that is a project that is well underway. I also note that the quarterly report contains the financial statement, and that is a matter upon which this report is a historic document, and we are continuously updated as to the financial position of Council. With those comments, I'm happy to move this motion and thank those officers that have prepared this high quality report, which as always provides a very easy to read and digestible highlight of Council's activities, and I commend it to the community.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Belmar, for those comments. It is an effective way of communicating our achievements on a quarterly basis, not just because of our statutory obligation to do so, but also to highlight those key outcomes and outputs that are of interest to the community. And by referencing and expanding upon some of the comments that Mr Belmar has already made, if I could be specific around one of the issues that came up in public question time earlier this afternoon, Chair, around the tree canopy situation here in the city of Casey, which is a very significant issue. What we as Council try to do with these reports is to highlight specific issues and achievements against our action plan and our strategic objectives, which not only provide the transparency of that information flow to the public, but also does hopefully provide a reference to members of the community that might have specific interest in some of these aspects. And I note that on page 10 of the report, under Strategy 3.1, Conserve, Enhance and Restore the Natural Environment, we do have specific actions and status and updates against the tree canopy issue in the municipality itself, which does provide the basis that those interested and engaged members of the community who are raising these issues in public questions, there is a reference point through this and other material which could provide the answers in preparation for any further clarification or advice sought through such a forum. So I just make those comments, Chair, that this is a very transparent and detailed way of communicating our objectives, our achievements and our actions and correlations with our strategic plans, and one that does provide that reference point and could be used by the community hopefully more effectively to provide the basis of some of these specific and interested subjects.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I'd also like to add some comments, and in particular note the section on page 31 of the papers which details the community engagement opportunities that Council has offered over the previous quarter. And there's just 3 that are highlighted, but there are over 20 that were conducted. And in particular, I just wanted to note the expressions of interest that were sought from the community to participate in a disability access and inclusion group. with a high level of participation in terms of commentary, and 56 specific contributions received from the community with respect to that topic, giving a voice to people with disabilities, their families and their carers. So I think that's a very important piece of consultation, but there are many others that occurred during the quarter, including a phenomenal number of submissions that were made, some 749 submissions to various consultation exercises undertaken, both face-to-face, via email, online and through Casey Conversations. So thank you. I shall put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.2 is Council's submission to the Electoral Services Review being conducted by the Victorian Electoral Commission. And I do note that officers have suggested a revised recommendation which amends item 3, and I believe that's now on the screen. So item 3 would have the additional words subject to amendment to the ward name Churchill, which is being suggested to be replaced with Calora. The rationale that officers have provided for that shift is that the name Churchill is inconsistent with Council's current naming policy. So that's the revised recommendation from officers. And I seek a mover and a seconder for the motion.
I'll move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. And a seconder? I'll second. Mr. Belmar.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman.
I'll speak to both the motion and the recommendation within the officer's report for item 5.2 and highlight that this is a statutory function that the Minister for Local Government has appointed an electoral representation advisory panel who on the 1st of November did release the preliminary report in relation to the proposed electoral boundaries within the city of Casey, which contained 3 options for consideration by members of the public. The closing date of these submissions next Wednesday, or tomorrow in fact, Wednesday the 22nd of November. There is also the opportunity for members of the public to participate in a public consultation call, the details of which are contained in the Public Council report this Friday on the 24th of November. There are a number of councils, in fact the majority of councils have had their electoral boundaries reviewed. This is something very consistent with not just the growth in this part of the world but the growth across the state as a whole, which has given rise, I should say, to looking at what is the most effective way of taking consideration of the municipal boundaries and having some degree of equality and equilibrium across the proposed new ward boundaries, considering that the statutory requirement now is for single-member wards leading up to the return of elected councils here in October next year. The 3 models that have been proposed by the ERAP include a first model of a single-member ward with 11 councillors, which is based upon the use of major roads as the boundaries. So it's a very strict delineation of those boundaries based upon roads being the main feature to separate ward from ward. Model 2 is a single-member ward with 11 councils, which takes in consideration suburban boundaries to delineate the differences across the municipality so that there is more of a community concentration of the wards based upon suburbs. And Model 3 is a single-member ward with 12 councils based upon both the use of major roads in Model 1, but also taking into consideration that with the additional number of councils from 12 versus 1, that it does provide a greater level of coverage across the entire municipality through smaller wards. What we do need to note in our submission, we are supporting Model 3. Whilst this is not Council's decision to make, this is something that the VEC themselves will make following further consultation from the ERAP, as I've said. The growth in this municipality does give rise to, even with 12 specific wards and potentially 12 councillors, that there could be up to 21,000 voters within each new ward, which is a significant number of voters to serve. It also provides a change in the environment from a local governance administration perspective, considering what was previously multi-member wards, but it is probably the most practical and straightforward, and gives rise to the best representation that the organisation can have in the future. In relation to the amendment around ward names, the panel has suggested that names should be used to be based upon Indigenous names, place names, flora and fauna, and also established features within the municipality. Whilst there is, of course, Churchill Park within the city of Casey that does, I think, also abut the neighbouring city of Dandenong, and that has been established in a long period of time. The proposal is that Kalara is, I think, a type of fauna. It is more consistent with the policy that we've outlined in our submission based upon how we come up with new names for the municipality. And the officer's recommendation does give basis to that being considered. So there is no objection from the panel in that regard. But this is just a submission back to the ERAP. Whether they take note of it is certainly up to them. They've got a very tight deadline by, I think, February. They need to report back with the final boundaries, and then, of course, preparation will be through the VEC to conduct the election in October next year. So with those words, we support the submission and the amendment as put, and I look forward to receiving confirmation of the final ward boundaries early next year.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Any further comments, Mr Belmar?
Thank you, Chair. Just some brief comments from me in supporting tonight's motion. I want to say that it's fundamental to good governance to have ward boundaries, electoral boundaries that are carefully thought out, that are the subject of input from the community, and that represent the opportunity for electors to be represented by their local representatives, and that's fundamental not just in local government but more broadly. I note that the three options that are proposed are carefully set out in the report that has been prepared by the committee. I know chaired by Frank Vincent AOKC. It's interesting to note the assessment of each of those boundaries and the careful analysis that has occurred with respect to the manner that the boundaries are set out. I note that option 3 is the option that officers are recommending that we support as a panel, and I am obviously supportive of that option. I note that the increase from 11 councillors to 12 councillors with respect to the assessment of this report makes a significant and appropriate compromise to ensuring that an appropriate number of electors is represented by each future councillor. And with those comments and noting the comments of Mr Cameron, I am happy, Mr Boardman, my apologies, I am happy to second this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.3 is Heritage Framework, and that is to facilitate the ongoing management of heritage assets in the City of Casey. Do I have a mover?
Yes, I'll move that.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight, in adopting this motion and this heritage framework, I note from the council papers that the framework is a carefully considered document. There are in fact two documents we're adopting tonight. One is a framework and the second is a plan for the first year of work. I note that the framework in its adoption has undergone a careful analysis of not only the work here within the City of Casey, but also looked at what other councils are doing as a way of adopting best practice and ensuring that there is a level of uniformity in the way that we approach heritage to the way that it's approached more broadly, and that can give the community security and satisfaction to the fact that things at Casey are being done in a uniform way. I note that that the recommendations of the review that occurred found that there was a need to ensure that the key challenges and opportunities regarding heritage in the City of Casey were met, to identify gaps in heritage protection and management, to have a clearer and more accurate actions with respect to those actions, to ensure that the nomination of a position or team within council to deliver each new action, and to have realistic and achievable targets. I note also that in the key initiatives, a framework method is being established, setting out 6 different ways of ensuring that the framework follows those initiatives, and they are knowing what heritage places we have and what they contribute, protecting them, supporting them, and also promoting them. This is a carefully thought out document. It's a strategic document which sets out the way that we would like to see things done. And I am happy to move this motion and also note the year 1 plan that is set out, and the achievable way that is set out and the careful way it's been adopted in a clear way that the community can consider this document and know exactly how council is approaching heritage. And with those comments, I'm happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Thank you, Chair. I wholeheartedly endorse and agree with the comments by my colleague, Mr Belmar. The depth of analysis in preparing the framework and the plan, as stipulated on page 97 of the council papers, which extends to not just the local knowledge and historical expertise that exists within the organisation, but taking into consideration the expertise and knowledge from the local library, local history librarian. There was certainly the Casey Heritage Community Reference Group involved. There was the review of the progress on the 2017 strategies. There was comparison with the approach taken by other councils in the state. There was advice and feedback from external heritage consultants, specialists in the field, of course, and there was also the application consideration of other regulatory standards as applicable. It has been an extraordinarily complicated and dedicated process on a very important matter, which Mr Belmar has articulated the framework and the initiatives. There are currently 180 heritage-related sites within the municipality that are categorised either as local significance, stating significance, Aboriginal heritage or archaeological sites, all of which have their own historical uniqueness, all of which have their necessities to be protected and endorsed under this framework. And the framework also and the plan provides an opportunity for future sites to be assessed and to come into the framework as necessary to ensure that that heritage that is clearly articulated and defined within the plan is protected now and into the future. So it is another suite of reference material that does provide consistency and clarity to our community on the expectations of managing such sites and the framework around protecting such sites, and importantly the utilisation of such sites. So I do, like Mr Belmar, commend all of those stakeholders and parties that were involved in the preparation and the drafting of the document. It is comprehensive and a very clear and practical reference point, and one that is completely consistent with our statutory obligations under state legislation. And with those comments, likewise, I'm pleased to endorse the adoption of the plan and the framework.
Thank you, Mr Boardman, and thank you for your overview of the work or the input of the Heritage Community Reference Group. It is a model that has been well utilised in the last several years with the involvement of the community, informed and interested members of the community in reference groups, and this is an extremely good example of quite a complex topic and the opportunity for the community to participate. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.4 is Amendment C291, Planning Scheme Corrections in the Casey Planning Scheme. Do I have a mover for the recommendation on page 134?
Chair, I'll move the recommendation as put.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I'll second it.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
And Chair, as members in the gallery and members of the community watching online will see by the recommendation, it does look very complex and technical. It is, in summary, a correction to Amendment C291 that is taking consideration some elements that need to be, and some definitional aspects that need to be adjusted to the planning scheme. They are clearly articulated on page 135 of the public documents, but I will very briefly reference these just for the point of clarification. So there is hopefully no ambiguity as to the complexity or what, as I hopefully will articulate, lack thereof very shortly. But it does, and then the various existing maps, and includes 2 new incorporated documents that have been included in the attachments. It does update the description of the heritage properties in the schedule to actually reflect the location of heritage sites, which is coincident considering the most recent agenda item. It deletes from the overlay St Peter's Tooradin, South Gippsland Highway Tooradin, as the site is no longer of heritage significance. It does rezone public consultation and public conservation and resource zones and public use zones, mapping anomalies to other conservations and residential zones, respectively, as dictated in the attachments, and it updates clause 221017 to correct a spelling mistake to make Casey Planning Scheme more usable. So it is a technical recommendation that's based on a review of the overall amendment to be consistent with what our requirements under the Act and the Planning Minister's directions, along with our policy framework and the state government policy framework. And having read the explanatory report and the other documentations that outline the corrections necessary, I fully endorse the recommendation as put, and it is one that needs to be commended from the diligence and detailed-oriented nature of the organisation to ensure that we are meeting our statutory requirements as vigilantly and as concise as required. So I'm pleased to put the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on those final comments of Mr Boardman, this shows the diligence and the good governance of our officers in ensuring that when anomalies are identified, that the appropriate statutory steps are taken to ensure that at all times our planning scheme properly references the facts on the ground. I note the use of the word that it is proposed to fix-up amendment. It's a very clear drafting way of explaining what's occurred. Again, I commend the officers for their very open use of language in preparing this report and the reasons as to why it needs to occur. I note that there's really no slip rule under the planning scheme for these sorts of anomalies, and it's appropriate and necessary that it go through a council meeting, and that's also appropriate because the community can be aware that when these matters are found through a public process, being this meeting, they are identified and brought to our attention as council, and an amendment can occur. I want to thank the members of staff who have undertaken this careful work, and also thank any members of the community who have brought this to our attention to ensure that at all times the scheme properly reflects the facts. And with those comments, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.5 is the Brentwood Neighbourhood House and Community Centre application for the Growing Suburbs Fund. And I note in previous times this was simply submitted but is now required to be submitted via a council resolution. So do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. And a seconder?
Second, Chair.
Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. I note the recommendation, which I will read onto the record. The Council endorse submission to the Growing Suburbs Fund 2023-24 for the Brentwood Park Neighbourhood House and Community Centre Upgrade Project, and in doing so notes and commits the required rates contribution of $287,100. I note that this is a application that's been prepared by Council officers, and I note the following description. The Brentwood Park Neighbourhood House is located within Berwick South, which forecast to increase population over 30% by 2041 due to the development of the Berwick Waterways and Minter Farm precincts. It's also in proximity to the growth suburb of Clyde North. This means it services both established and growth areas. I note that the balance of the officer report goes on to identify what the project will do, and it will include an upgraded entry area, replace flooring in the primary community room, provide a suitable area for activities, to introduce design elements and to minimise energy consumption and increase participant safety through improved layout and furnishings. Each of those identified goals are matters that are appropriate for Council to pursue, and I commend the officers for making this application, for identifying an appropriate project for the Growing Suburbs Fund, and I am happy to move this motion and am hopeful of a positive response. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman, anything to add?
Chair, just to note your comments that it is a requirement that we endorse this. It normally wouldn't come to us, but it is a requirement under this round. It is the only submission that Casey is making under this round. We've reviewed the application, the project, its justification and its costs, and as Mr Belmar has articulated, we fully endorse the application and wish it every success.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.6 is the Draft Officer South Employment Precinct Structure Plan, and the purpose of this is to seek the endorsement of Casey's draft submission to the VPA. Do I have a mover?
Yes, I will move this recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Mr Boardman, and a seconder.
Yes, I'll second it.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman, please speak to the motion.
Chair, it is, as you've articulated, endorsement of our submission to the VPA regarding the Cardinia Planning Scheme and also the Officer South Employment Precinct Structure Plan. It does primarily emphasise the importance of the extension of Thompson's Road, which is a matter that we have discussed at Council and directly with the state government a number of times. We believe that the extension of Thompson's Road, particularly that corridor, could potentially result in economic uplift of up to 140,000 jobs and be a significant catalyst for further investment and strengthen the local and regional economy. It is a very significant part of the road infrastructure within this municipality that does not just have a benefit to Casey, but certainly to neighbouring municipalities, Cardinia particularly. There is some significant economic specific uplifts. We have identified that independently there would be $4.4 for every dollar that is spent that potentially could result in a $90 billion net benefit over 30 years. And the justification not just on improving traffic infrastructure and also improving access to community and social facilities in addition to the economic benefits cannot be understated. In our submission, it is it is articulated quite specifically that if this does not occur, there potentially could be an unfunded liability of almost $11 million for Casey. This is as a consequence of the gazettal of the Minter Farm ICP. It is not something that Casey wants to in any way be responsible for, but we've had to be quite specific in the submission insofar as the VPA not adhering to our wishes and drafting this or agreeing to our proposal. So the case that is made in the submission, as I've hopefully articulated, is very compelling. It is one that has significant whole of municipality and arguably whole of region benefits. And for that reason, it is something that we very strongly endorse and hope that the VPA sees it exactly the same way.
Thank you, Mr Boardman. Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. Can I adopt the comments of Mr Boardman with respect to the financial implications of this submission we are making? It's certainly since I have been working here at Council, Thompson's Road has absolutely been on the agenda it's the economic impact of the improvement of Thompson's Road is a matter upon which council has, at every opportunity, made a positive submission and sought its improvement. I note that this is a project that will benefit not only Casey but also the entire southeast, but in particular it will ensure a significant benefit to the city of Casey. My apologies. I note also the reference in the draft document, which we're endorsing tonight, to the Melbourne Industrial and Commercial Land Use Plan, building upon policies and strategies and actions in Plan Melbourne and informing the PSP on best possible outcomes for the Southern Metro's region's largest employment precinct. And in doing so, the submission picks up on the comments I've just made with respect to the broader implications of Thompson's Road. I'd like to commend council officers for their ongoing work on this issue. I note that the submission is, like any good submission, it is brief, easy to read, and makes its point at the start and at the end. It's a document which the VPA will have no doubt in understanding what Casey's position is on this issue, and I commend those who have worked on it. And with those comments, I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar, and I note in perusing the agenda of the Cardinia Council meeting, I think it was of last evening, they have similarly endorsed and raised issues with respect to Thompson Road. I will put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.7, Bushfire Places of Last Resort Plan Update. And so this is a shift in the decision-making point. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
Yes, I'll move this.
And seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
Mr Boardman, please speak to your motion, Mr Belmar.
Thank you, Chair. In moving this motion tonight, I note the very careful wording of the motion. It is, 1, that Council approve the revocation of Council as the endorsement body of the Bushfire Places of Last Resort Plan, and 2, that Council notes the Bushfire Places of Last Resort Plan will be a director-endorsed document going forward. So to be clear, we are not in any way revoking our plans. We are simply moving the authority for ensuring their review and adoption from Council to a director level. It's appropriate that this type of ongoing good governance occur so that an important document such as the Bushfire Places of Last Resort Plan can be continuously updated, can be continuously reviewed. I note that Council currently has 7 commissioned BPLRs throughout the municipality, that they are annually audited by the CFA and maintained by City Presentation in consultation with the Emergency Management Team. I am satisfied in reviewing the documents that it is appropriate that this step be taken, and to ensure that the relevant director be able to review the documents, work with the CFA on the annual audit, and to ensure that with the emergency management team, the plans are up to date and most responsive to our ever-growing community. And with those comments, I'm happy to move this motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, I don't really have much to add. I do appreciate Mr Belmar's distinction and the explanation around the distinction and what the actual action is here, but likewise having reviewed the proposal, the plan, and articulating, considering Council's future role, it is entirely appropriate and statutorily consistent that we do agree with the recommendation, and for that I'm very happy to second the recommendation.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. And the final report this afternoon is item 5.8, which is section 11A, instrument of authorisation under the Planning and Environment Act 1987, and I seek a mover for the recommendation.
I'll move 5.8, Chair.
Thank Thank you, Mr Boardman, and a seconder.
Yes, I'll second that.
Mr Belmar. Mr Boardman.
Chair, very briefly, it is a standard instrument of authorisation under the Planning Environment Act of where we are distinguishing Class A, Class B officers and the changes in personnel that have occurred since the last council meeting. It is a report that comes to us with a degree of consistency due to staffing changes, which is again entirely understandable in an organisation of this size. The reports articulate the changes that have occurred, which are very minimal. Nonetheless, with those changes, we do need to exercise our statutory requirements to adopt the instrument, and for the reasons that are articulated in the accompanying material and the accompanying report, I'm very pleased to move the recommendation as put.
Thank you. Any further comments, Mr Belmar?
No, Chair, only to commend the officers who have the ongoing task of ensuring that these documents are up to date, and to ensure that only those officers holding the appropriate delegation are making decisions. And I'm happy to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr Belmar. I put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. That concludes the officer reports this afternoon. I move to item 6, which is consideration of reports of committees, and I simply note the record of discussion as listed in the agenda papers. Item 7 is petitions. There are none. Item 8, late reports. There are none. Item 9, urgent business. There is none. And so that leaves me with item 10, to close the council meeting. I declare the meeting closed and thank those of you that have persisted in the gallery. Thank you for staying, and those watching online. Good afternoon.